Hi everyone, Tyler Manion here, NPC and IFBB Pro League Vice President. This will be your European Pro Open Men's Bodybuilding Recap, brought to you by Uprising. So before we get into it, pose by pose here with the top two, we'll go over prejudging, as the scores were very close in prejudging between the top three guys. Really why this was the case was in prejudging, Bruno was really just a little bit too soft. And going through all the poses, it was very clear that going by the physique, Bruno had the best physique on stage. But the conditioning was lacking just enough that many of the judges had many different opinions on the top three. They were very mixed up. In the morning, Andrea's conditioning was definitely the best. He was definitely the most conditioned and most separated. However, he was looking very imbalanced in certain poses between his upper and his lower body, especially from the front and from the back. Lewis's conditioning was the best that I've seen him personally. He's never the most deeply separated guy, but this was probably the deepest separation that I've seen him have. He was full and he was also conditioned. He just has a lot of thick, gnarly muscle, but he doesn't have the greatest shape or the greatest structure. Between all of this, conditioning-wise, obviously it would be probably like Presti, Lewis, then Bruno. But if you go about overall physique, muscularity, and completeness, it probably would go Bruno, Presti, then Lewis. It was all jumbled up all over the place because of really because of the conditioning. Now, for the finals, Bruno came back just tight enough where he could hang with those two guys. Still could he have been tighter? Yes, but the glutes were more dug in, the hamstrings were more dug in, the lines in his legs and also his back were more separated. The separation was deeper, so obviously it made him pop more. Also, in the finals, Andrea flattened out from what he looked like in the morning. He lost some of the detail, especially in his back. So while he was still conditioned for sure, he wasn't as full and everything wasn't popping as much as it was during prejudging. Lewis definitely flattened out a good bit. His conditioning was definitely a good bit different from prejudging to finals. And he's not a guy that has, like I said, the deeper lines in the separation. So when he lost that and he lost that pop, it really hampered him next to the other two guys. So we'll go through the top two pose by pose so you guys see what I'm talking about. The first pose up is the front double bicep. Now, when you look at Andrea, his front double bicep up top, he has a very nice taper, a nice small waist, has solid arms, definitely biceps. Triceps could still be a little bit better. Then you get to the lower body, and the legs just looked really thin here, at this show. His sweep really, really needs to come up a lot, but also even, separation that he has in other parts of his physique, from the front and the quads, because just there's not enough muscle there, so it doesn't look as hard as some of the other body parts do for him. Now with Bruno, definitely much more balanced and complete head to toe. This is, overall arms, bicep, tricep. He still has a nice taper into a solid waist. His waist is a little bit wider than Andrea's. His taper, his lats aren't as thick. They don't come out as wide, but it's still a nice shape. It's not like he's blocky or anything. Lower body-wise, he has very strong quads. I still think he could use a little bit more leg width here in the front, but his legs and his upper body were very balanced. And like I said, during the finals, he had more of those lines and deep separation to make this pop. So for me, Bruno took this to make it 1-0. Next up would be the front lat spread. Again, with Andrea, just a lot of imbalance between the upper and the lower body because of the legs. I also think that he could get his lats out on this front lat spread a little bit better. He kind of shrugs his traps and shoulders up a little bit too much, so his taper that you see in the front double, you're not seeing the same exact width in the front lat spread. Now, Bruno hits this pose very well. You see the thickness through the arms, the shoulders, and the chest. His taper in the front lat spread looks a lot better than his taper does in the front double bicep. And again, you get down to the lower body, and his legs and quads were just much more balanced with his upper body and also just a lot better than Andrea's. So that would make it 2 poses to 0 for Bruno. The next pose up would be the side chest. Now, this is a very strong pose for Andrea. You see conditioning shining through the separation between the quad and the hamstring. His legs from the side are actually very strong, so he has good size to his side leg. Also, the shoulders and arms are a good size with good detail. His chest is very thick. He was pretty striated. His waist is in. Very good pose for him. A solid pose for Bruno as well. He has good arms and shoulders. He has solid chest thickness. His waist was in also. Now, for Bruno, his side leg actually doesn't look as big as his legs do from the front or from the back. And next to Andrea, his side leg is definitely smaller than Andrea's as well. Conditioning-wise, obviously, Andrea beat Bruno. So for me, this was a clear pose for Andrea to make it 2 poses to 1. The next pose is the back double bicep pose. So the back double bicep, when you look at Andrea, he has solid arms and shoulders from the back. Again, he gets to use a little bit more to the triceps here, but they're still solid. For him, his upper back development is pretty strong. Lower back is not as strong, so you don't see as much detail there. Again, we get down to the legs, and his conditioning was good. His hamstrings were in, but his leg width and overall leg size is definitely lacking, so he is top heavy. For Bruno, he has a better back itself overall, I think, than Andrea top to bottom. He has thickness in the lower lats. He has good bubbly round muscle. Shoulders and arms are solid too. Leg width and size is better and more balanced with his upper body than Andrea's is with his own. Now, conditioning, Andrea in the morning definitely was much better with the conditioning. Now, during the finals at night, Andrea kind of flattened out a little bit. So even the picture we're putting up here is from prejudging. But in the night, that upper back detail and pop really flattened out a lot. So that hurt him at night as well. But overall, this is still a pose where even with Andrea's weaknesses and imbalances, Bruno, with the conditioning, I think could take this pose. But even at night, it was more of a toss-up than anything. And Andrea took it in the morning. And just because of the overall condition, even at night, even with the flatness, I still gave this to Andrea to make it 2 poses to 2. The next pose is the back lat spread pose. So the back lat spread pose for Andrea is much weaker for him than the back double. Again, he's hitting the lat spread wrong. He is rounding forward, rounding his shoulders forward, angling them forward. He's not getting his lats out as wide as they should be, and he's flattening out his whole entire back, so we're not seeing the density and depth to his back there. Again, the conditioning in the lower body is good, but the size could be better. Now with Bruno, he hits this back lat spread very, very well. You can see the thickness and the density to his back. You can also see much better width to his back in this pose. And again, his legs compared to his upper body are much more balanced. The hamstrings, even how he hits this pose, his hamstrings stick out a little bit more. You can see a little bit more of his conditioning. And at night, for me, this was a slam dunk pose because of the completeness for Bruno to make it 3 to 2. So next up is the side tricep pose. Now, Andrea with his side tricep pose definitely has a little bit of a flexibility issue because he has to kind of twist his waist and turn to the front a little bit more than he should be doing. This obviously is making his waist look wider. Also, it's hurting him with his side leg and how wide and how big it looks on stage because of how the angle that he has to hold his leg as well to put his arms behind his back to flex for the side tricep. If you see and compare to the side chest pose, his side leg in the side chest pose looks big, and it has a good detail and everything else. You'll see the size difference now and how it looks in this side tricep pose. Also, obviously, his weaker point on his arm is his tricep that needs to come up. Now for Bruno, a very complete pose for him. Again, I think the size of his side leg can come up a little bit more. Obviously, his conditioning can come up a little bit more as well. But we see really great arms and shoulders on him. His chest still looks thick. His waist is tight, and we still see his abs in this pose. So really, the only 2 things he would have to work on is getting that gnarly conditioning better than what it was here. And then also adding a little bit more size to the side leg, but a very, very complete pose overall for him. And because of the weaknesses and the angle that Andrea is hitting this pose from, I gave this pose to Bruno to make it 4 to 2. The next pose is the abdominals and thigh pose. So again, for Andrea, he kind of leans almost a little bit too far forward, but obviously he has a great midsection and great abs. He still has a solid taper, although because he's crunching, he's losing a little bit of his taper in those lats, in the width in his lats, to make this an even more dominant pose in his upper body for him. Now we get down to the lower body, and that's where he's really lacking the thigh part of the pose. The legs just need to be bigger. Also, you can see on his trail leg, you really can barely see anything to the quads here because he just doesn't have enough tissue. So that's really distracting for him in this pose, and you can see the imbalance between the upper and the lower body. Bruno, again, hits this pose very well. I think overall Bruno posed very, very well at the show. He hit a lot of poses that made sure he was standing the correct way, positioning himself the correct way, and showing off all of his strengths that he could. You see he has very full arms, go down even with the chest thickness. That enhances the pose. Good lat width, coming into a nice tight waist. He also has strong abs as well. And again, his quad development is much more than Andrea's here. The separation could be a little bit deeper. The conditioning could be a little bit more. But overall, a very complete and balanced pose for him that lets him take the pose to make it 5 poses to 2. And finally, the most muscular pose. And again, for me, it just came down to the balance between the upper and the lower body. I think they were very similar in the upper body part of this pose with muscularity. Conditioning, still you would give the edge to Andrea a little bit more. But again, because the lower body, the tissue isn't there, he's not getting that whole conditioning package. It's really just focused to the upper body for him. Bruno's conditioning could be more, but overall, again, the balance and the overall fullness and roundness and muscularity to his physique had me giving him this pose to make it 6 poses to 2. So in my opinion, at finals, the difference in conditioning really shut the door for this show for him and shut it on Andrea, and that's what made the big changes in the scores. In third, we had Lewis. Lewis still needs, I would say, more width to his back. He needs more size to his legs overall. Side leg, front leg, back leg. His back double bicep, his back can still get better in that pose as well. Depth and density and detail overall. So it's really, more 3D-like on stage. And I think he's, again, from last year to this year, he's done a good job working on bringing in his waistline, improving his structure, improving his taper. And his conditioning in the morning, again, was the best I've seen it, but he still needs to work on doing whatever he can to get those lines deeper and that separation deeper in his physique. And he kind of just got out-muscled and out-structured both by the 2 guys ahead of him. And finally, in 4th place, we had Mo from Germany. I think he brought a very impressive look to the show. He had a lot of strong points in his physique. His main improvements would be he needs to work on his overall back. The number one thing is he needs more width. He's a little bit too straight up and down. You can obviously see that in both the front and back double, both the front and back lat spread. Even, abdominals and thigh hands overhead, you see he doesn't have that lat width that, enhances the taper coming down into his midsection. He has good abs. He also can use more development to his hamstrings as well, because he was in solid condition, but you didn't see it throughout the hamstrings because just there's not enough tissue there. And his conditioning was good, but I still think he could push it a little bit more to really bring out and highlight all the strengths of his physique. That's your top 4 for the European Pro.